Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel. Welcome to everyone in Austin and Toronto and anywhere else where you are going to be seeing this presentation. I'm very sad that I cannot be with you in either of the two conference locations, but hopefully you will be able to follow my talk anyway. The topic of my presentation is quiet power, the role of Nordic IOC members during the Cold War. I picked this map here of the Nordic countries purposefully, since it includes Greenland, which the people here in Denmark at least very much consider to be part of the Nordic countries. I want to begin with a restaurant bill today. It's from October 1969, from the Hotel d'Angleterre, the English hotel in Copenhagen, which is one of Scandinavia's most prestigious hotels. What you can see on the bill is aquavit, is ramløsa, sparkling water, herring marinated in sherry, and also a salt-cured duck. So not maybe what you want to have right now at breakfast time in Canada or in Texas, but I would say a perfectly ordinary dinner for a formal Nordic occasion. Except for the fact that sitting around that table that day were representatives from all 5 Nordic Olympic committees, alongside the region's members of the International Olympic Committee. And what they were discussing had quite an impact on the future of the Olympic movement. My talk, which is based on a chapter that I wrote for an anthology, takes that restaurant bill very, very seriously as a historical source, because as many of you will know, the most revealing archival finds are also often the most mundane. So the question that I'm asking here is, how can we contextualize this restaurant bill, and how does it help us to understand some of the Nordic power, the background to some of the grand policy making in the Olympic movement at the end of the 1960s? It's not only the restaurant bill, of course, that I will be using as a archival source. It's actually 4 archival collections that my presentation draws on. It's the private paper of the IOC member Eva Wind, who plays a central role in this story. The Avery Brundage collection, the IOC's historical archives in Lausanne, and also the Danish newspaper archive. Because as you as historians, of course, all know, we can only add that context that we need to the hotel bill if we also look into these other sources. And for me, finding out what that meeting here was about really relied on the newspaper coverage. In fact, that was published on the next day, which you can see a hemmelig olympisk møde, a secret Olympic meeting, where the entire Nordic countries is gathering in Copenhagen to speak about Olympic policy. Let me set the scene very briefly. By the end of the 1960s, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, was under, I would say, serious institutional strain. The elite body with the co-opted members, the very personal networks that have a history back to the founder of the IOC, Pierre de Coubertin, they were facing threats. The world is changing fast during this time. We have decolonialization, which is expanding the number of national Olympic committees. We have, of course, Cold War tensions very much at play in the Olympics. And there were particularly a growing number of individuals, leaders of national Olympic committees that felt that they had no voice in the IOC. And into this vacuum stepped Giulio Onesti, who was the president of the Italian National Olympic Committee and also an IOC member. He was working together with Soviet sport officials, and they promoted the creation of what he called a permanent General Assembly of National Olympic Committees. And the idea here was to institutionalize the NOCs as a collective force within the Olympic system. As you can imagine, this was deeply alarming for many IOC members because if the PGA succeeded, then of course power would shift away from the IOC and towards something that resembled a more federal, potentially more democratic structure. There have been quite a few papers written about this by Lefebvre, most recently in a Frontiers article. But here the focus is, of course, how do the Nordic countries come into this story? At the center of the Nordic response was Ivar Vind of Denmark. He had joined the IOC after a successful elite high jump career and an education as a lawyer in 1959. He was proposed by the then retiring Danish IOC member Prince Axel. And crucially, Ivar Vind was also on the IOC's executive board between 1963 and 1967. Only the fourth Nordic IOC member to do so, and the first Dane. And no Dane has held this position since. Ilse Trangbæk, my colleague from the University of Copenhagen, she has done some work on Ivar Vind in the last couple of years, where she and some colleagues focused on Vind's public image and his commitment to the Olympic values. But what I want to focus on is more Vind's tactical labor and how he tried to steer the IOC policies in the background. One example, the IOC Executive Board met in Copenhagen in 1967, and it was not the only time that influential IOC members came to the Danish capital. And Vind had a very close relationship, for example, with Avery Brundage. He was part of the so-called shooting club of leading IOC members where they went out hunting in Denmark, in Great Britain, also in France. Grand Duke of Luxembourg was an important member of this group, if you like. And they gathered regularly also at Vind's estate that we can see here on this picture in Sanna Romgaard. And in this executive board meeting, we find archival documents, how he's really trying to steer, orchestra these meetings. He also writes a lot about these meetings and how important they are, these private gatherings. He writes, for example, that they will resolve, quote, real unsolved problems, which we cannot discuss in the meeting rooms, or, quote, talk far from the scrutiny of the press. He also acted behind the scenes when it came to the PGA. We have correspondence, for example, with the Finnish IOC member Erik van Frankel on the PGA, which reaches back to 1966. Van Frankel was the most senior Nordic IOC member, and Vind approached him already in 1966 about these tensions within the IOC, where he writes, for example, quote, we stand on the brink of the disintegration of the whole organization. The Nordic countries must, and he emphasizes this, act to protect our power. In another letter in 1967, he wrote, we may very well turn the balance in the right direction. So he's using or attempting to use collective force of the Nordic countries here as a political resource, and he's trying to intervene before any formal positions are being taken, aligning Nordic colleagues, ensuring that the Nordic voices would enter the IOC discussions in a very coordinated manner. And we see that a lot in his correspondence with other influential IOC members too. Coming slowly back to the hotel bill, and where it becomes particularly meaningful, and this is into other archival documents that belong to the same time period. One is a confidential circular letter from June 1996, June 69, sorry, written by the president of the National Olympic Committee, Gudmund Schack, and Ivar Wendt, where they are heavily criticizing Giulio Onesti and his approach. He warns that these initiatives might destroy the entire Olympic movement, and that it is very important that the Nordic sport officials speak out on the initiative because of its perceived links also from the Eastern Bloc. So there was also a political dimension to this discussion. As I said, this letter is about 3 months before the meeting in Copenhagen in the Hotel d'Angleterre, but it sets the scene, and we can read from it what was most likely center of the discussion at that meeting. After the meeting in Copenhagen, the dinner, we see this letter from Schack translated into a concrete outcome, because only a couple of days after, the National Olympic Committees of the Nordic countries, all 5, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, they put together what became known as the so-called Nordic Manifesto, which is addressed to the IOC Executive Board. It's a very sober institutional diagnosis, I will say. It describes the rapid expansion of the Olympic movements. It asks very provocatively, quote, where is our headquarters? Is it in Mexico, Rome, Chicago, or is it in Lausanne? And it sort of moves this background maneuvering of Wendt and also other Nordic IOC members into a formal intervention, I will say. Importantly, Wendt himself is not signing the document because he's, of course, part of the IOC, so he's supposed to represent the IOC all over the world or in his country, but it is the National Olympic Committee presidents or leaders who are signing this document. And again, we see here, so it's actually Wendt who is speaking through these Nordic countries' sport leaders, even though his name is not on the paper. Importantly, and maybe little known also to the scholarship, is that it was not only a criticism on the PGA, but even more so on the leadership of the IOC that is shining through what the Nordic countries was promoting here. And that becomes very evident a few days after the meeting because an extensive correspondence between the future IOC president, Lord Kilanin, and Ivar Wendt begins. And the two discussed that the problem was actually not the PGA itself, but rather that the IOC under IOC President Brundage had allowed alternative powers to emerge, and that it was time to slowly shift to another leadership. And that sets in motion a very close correspondence between Kilanin and Wendt, where Wendt continuously communicates Nordic interests to the Irishman. And then, of course, eventually, Lord Kilanin is elected new IOC president in 1972. So coming back to the hotel, I will argue that whilst cold war sport history has often been told through the lens of national confrontation, I think that case disrupts that framing a little bit, shows that there was also a lot of action outside those categories, not least here in the Hotel d'Angleterre, which, as you can see in the picture, is actually a very significant place also in movie history. It was here that along many parts of the Hitchcock movie Torn Curtain have been filmed. in this very lobby that most likely also Vint and his colleagues was sitting. So just like Torn Curtain, a story here about informal power, about how influence is exercised through personal relationships and managed settings, whether that's the hotel or Vint's estate. With that, I will leave you and look forward to some questions that you might have. Thank you very much.